My last diorama video is blowing up, and I'm just like, really? Because it was pretty simple. So today I'm going to show you how to make another terrain model, specifically of the face on Mars. I actually built this around the same time as the Daft Punk No Face, just because it was a little unsettling having a creepy Hellraiser face mask lying around, scaring away house guests. There's always an explanation when you invite guests over to a prop maker's place. Yes, I did this to solve a problem, and I'm not sure I did. See, the xenomorphs, they're okay. For this build, you'll need a styrofoam dummy head, a flat piece of wood to act as a base, scrap foam, a newspaper, a time machine in order to get a newspaper, glue, some type of putty, doesn't matter what brand, spray paint, texture paint, sand, water, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. Yeah, those will work on this one. Couldn't hurt, well, unless you stab yourself. First, I cover the head in scrap foam to bulk it out a bit. Originally, I did this so that I could use the head for helmet patterning for all of my prop helmets. However, if you're actually attempting to build a face on Mars diorama, it might help to shave down the details on the styrofoam, rather than building them back up. You'd just be building a slightly smaller scale. Although it's always so messy to carve into styrofoam. Gonna be cleaning that snow up for a week. So the face has these kind of angular features, so I think it really helps for the forehead and the nose. And if you're doing the forehead, you kinda gotta do most of the rest of the face. Just saying. Then I filled in the gaps with putty. After that, I cut the face off, like a serial killer. Tonight's the night. For those of you who aren't familiar, thanks for sticking with me this far. First off, when the Viking space probes went to Mars in the 70s, they took many photos, including this one. Wait for it. Zoom in, now enhance. That's kind of as good as we can do. It was a low resolution camera, it was the 70s. Conspiracy theorists believed that this was clear evidence of extraterrestrial life. A later flyby with a much higher resolution camera, however, revealed it to be nothing more than a rocky plateau with outcroppings that appear to be facial features at certain times of the day, in certain sunlight. This, however, was of course seen as an attempt to cover up the truth by those sneaky NASA scientists. In order to expose the conspiracy, true believers sent Don Cheadle to find out the truth. The mission was a near total disaster as it was discovered that Gary Sinise was a shape-shifting Martian bent on world domination. So using an ancient alien spacecraft hidden beneath the Martian monument, Cheadle successfully launched Sinise into a black hole, banishing him to a pocket dimension, where he's now forced to do documentary voiceovers for all time! Didn't you recognize him in Ken Burns? Of course you didn't. No one did. Because no one can stay awake for Ken Burns. Seriously, 5 minutes of those shows are like a sleeping pill. Although then you have dreams about the Civil War and the Dust Bowl, it's a whole thing. It's a trade-off. Everything in life's a trade-off. I may have gone off book here. Now that I've evened out the edge so that it sits relatively flat, I'm gonna shape the top of the head. It's supposed to be more squared off or flat top, kind of like a Boris Karloff Frankenstein head. So I cut into it, but because there's hot glue in there, I also had to rip it apart. It doesn't have to be pretty. This can be easily refined later. For the base, I'm just gonna use scrap wood. A lot of people use EPS foam or foam core for their terrain builds, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I have a limited supply of EPS and an abundance of scrap wood, so scrap wood it is. I don't like scrap wood sticking around too long. It's turning my workshop into a tinderbox, and that'd be the worst way to go. Ooh, sorry, Tim Robbins. I centered the face. I'm deliberating a little bit here because there's a couple of craters and a little hill nearby, and I don't want those to fall on the edge of the board because then I'll end up having to build half a crater. And it's just ridiculous. When I was happy with it, I traced the edge around it, and then I mapped out the craters themselves. Then I attached the face with hot glue. I'm deliberately avoiding the forehead area because the styrofoam isn't quite level enough to actually connect there. Foam is an insulator, so it'll take a while for the hot glue to cool. While it cools, I'm weighting it down with a machinist block. It won't take a crazy long time. I'm just not in a hurry for this build, so I let it sit for 10 minutes. To fill in the gaps where the face didn't connect, I added a line of glue, but where the gap was larger, I shoved in scrap foam. Now the edge needs to be blended with the earth, because there'd be some buildup of rubble around the edges. Trust me, I know about ancient alien monuments. It'd be a waste of glue or putty if I were to use either of those here, so I'm gonna use paper mache instead. Typically paper mache is made with flour, but I have no flour in the house. I'm trying and failing at keto. They make gluten-free Oreos now. I'm done. That's it. I'm done for. I'm getting fat. Gonna get fat, everybody. So I'll be using watered down school glue. Then I took newspaper strips and soaked them in the mixture. I wadded them up and placed them around the edge of the face. Then I laid the strips over the face to blend it even more, as well as hide the seams still showing in between the pieces of foam. They're sort of fit in there haphazardly. I didn't really take care to fill in those seams at the time because I didn't originally plan for this to be a face facsimile. In fact, I think I only did the skull cap originally because those are the dimensions you need to make a helmet. And then my OCD kicked in and I just covered the whole thing. I thought the nose was a little too high and square, so I filed it down with a saw. I also refined some of the sharp angles with my rotary tool. See, that should have happened before I started covering this up. Sometimes you don't notice these things sequentially in the build process. It's just the way it works out. That first layer of strips is actually more waterlogged than it really needs to be, so I just used straight glue on the next layer, knowing that the water would soak through. As I worked, I made hills out of scrap foam and covered them with paper mache so that they would blend consistently. Then I put hot glue rings around the crater rim. You could just use hot glue to sculpt with. I've definitely done that before, but it would be a waste, and the whole point of this project is to use up scrap material. I guess foam clay would also work, but it shrinks over time. I'm trying to get this done within a reasonable amount of time. These are actually pretty low relief. They don't need to be so high. Then I covered the rest of it in paper mache in order to get rid of that wood grain. Before the glue water dried, I covered the whole project in sand, left over from so many builds. I think this was Geonosis. Yeah, I made a Star Wars fan film because of course I did. And there was this beach that was perfect for Geonosis. It looked like Geonosis. And now that I think about it, I could have color corrected it for Mars to make it look like Mars, but the weather was just awful for months. So we ended up just dumping sand all over the floor of a garage. When it had dried the next day, I spilled off the excess. I didn't get great coverage, so I went back in for another layer. After that had dried, I noticed some cracks on the face itself, so I went back in with putty. Oh, and I did a little bit of work on the craters as well. I did some more sanding with my rotary tool, but discovered that in covering the whole thing with sand, I'd essentially turned its surface into sandpaper. So the prop sanded back. At this point, I was getting fed up with the glue and sand, so I'm going to use texture paint. First, I used a rust texture to highlight the shadows. Essentially the eyes, the mouth, the base of the plateau, craters, and then just some areas where I could see some newspaper ink. Then I evened it out with a top coat of sand texture, beige. Oh, hey, it's B. Yeah, hi B, that's a camera. Hey B, better get out of here. I'm gonna paint you. Now that could actually almost work, but it looks a little like a confused mummy, like from the movie The Mummy, you know, with Brendan Fraser, where the mummy's face would come out of the sand and control sand. I think that curse was basically just Sandman from Spider-Man. Not a bad curse. What is Sandman doing hanging out in Queens? He should go to the Sahara and take over the planet. You're thinking too small, Sandman. Also, you can't hear me because you're fictional. And I'm talking at the wall, and my neighbors think I'm insane. At any rate, even though it's a little less realistic, I'm gonna give it a coat of red, which would have been a really great time lapse if the can hadn't run out. See, now I have to do a really thick coat just to make up for the splotchy coverage on the first can. All right, take two. So originally I thought that I was just gonna go with the sand color and then tint the whole thing red in post, which is what they actually do when they make Mars movies. They're all shot in Utah. But seeing as how this is coming across much more vibrant than I would have liked, I've literally painted myself into a corner. I'm gonna have to do the reverse and tone it down a bit in post. Wow, that looks very disturbing when the paint's wet. That looks way more serial killery than the dummy head. I just made this problem 10,000 times worse. It's like the blood lake from Descent. So, pro tip, don't use gloss. That's the wrong type of paint. However, it dried pretty flat. There we go, far less creepy. Our creepy levels are down 60%. And that's how to make very specific Martian terrain, like a teeny tiny chunk of the planet. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. I know it was a little different from what I normally do. If you did enjoy it, give it a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be updated on future builds. If you really want to help out, you can support me on Patreon, like all these fine people scrolling by. And let me know what you think of terrain videos. It's the sort of thing that I build a lot to use in backgrounds for the cutaways, you know, because it's easier and less dangerous to just shoot everything on a green screen and then use a forced perspective effect rather than building an actual set. But I've never done tutorials of that process before because it's, you know, it's like a supporting character to the main prop. So yeah, let me know in comments below. Happy crafting, see you later.